What up, y'all? Welcome back to the Bees Like That podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris. Today, I guess we call it week 4, so we are on step 4 of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is made a fearless and moral inventory of ourselves. I'm just going to jump right into it. One of the key elements of step 4 for me, upon reflection and in the notes that I've made for you guys, is self-honesty and reflection. It requires the individual, me, alcoholic, to take a fearless and thorough moral inventory, looking deeply into our pasts, attitudes, and behaviors. And it's about being honest with oneself, identifying personal flaws, resentments, fears, harmful patterns that have contributed to our struggles with addiction. Now, breaking this down even further, thorough and moral inventory. So this means we're going to go through with as fine a tooth comb as we possibly can to reach back as far as we can. Now, some people include moral offenses, I guess you could categorize them as, dating back as, far back into their childhood. And I would say that I'm not a person who will weigh on whether or not another person should do or include these things. I think my position would be, if there's some perceived catharsis there, meaning you're going to get a therapeutic value of including that, and it's not going to harm you in any way to revisit any of these things, then hey, go for it, kill it. One thing that I do when considering step 4 is I include all of the things that I would say fall neatly or most neatly into the category of my career in active addiction. Now, that could start as early as one's first use. I didn't go back that far because the first time I used alcohol was about 9. First time I smoked weed was around the same age. I think that back then, regardless of the inclusion, I guess, of substances, drugs and alcohol, that at 9 years old, I think that you're kind of in a category of or at a state in maturation, meaning maturity and development, that you're accountable to a degree. I don't know that many 9-year-olds have the level of finesse when it comes to deception and hurting people, because most at 9 years old haven't had that level of experience, right, with relationships and the different dynamics. We're babies, right? So I say that to kind of button up nicely for the listener, that I include all of the things that I feel like, again, mostly fit snugly or nicely or properly into my career as an alcoholic or an addict. And it's not easy, especially when a lot of us, like my career, if you can call it my drinking career, I guess, like the substantive part of it began around like 14 and, continued until my early 40s. So that's a lot to go back and detail and record and look deeply and process each and every individual one. I think to try and do that would be an undertaking I guess if you have the memory capacity for it. But anyway, I think including the things that were most impactful. That's pretty much what I did. And evaluating closely the attitudes and behaviors, meaning the survival mechanisms that are attached to these things. Because what does it all mean when you break it down? at 15, when I'm just getting blitzed, a lot of the stuff I did, like, you have to come into the same room through multiple doors at the same time, kind of, which means I'm looking for acceptance. I'm grieving a life that I think that I deserved and didn't have, meaning I didn't have a typical childhood. I've shared a lot about my childhood. I didn't have a typical adolescence in teen years. When I was 15, I was literally homeless, not technically homeless, but literally homeless. And I didn't have any one adult over another who displayed what I think would be the appropriate level of care and concern for a kid my age. Especially the level of involvement that I think should have been there. Because when I look at my son, or any of my kids at 14, if they were to have been doing the shit that I was doing at 14, boy, I would be, they wouldn't be able to breathe. I'd be all up in their business so fast and so regularly. Like, that's no guarantee of a positive outcome, but at least for posterity's sake, and in my mind and in theirs, they can say when they hit 40, 45, 46, somebody gave a damn, even though I still rebelled and did my own thing. But anyway, back to identifying those survival techniques, right? And breaking those down and understanding where malice starts and stops, where trauma starts and stops, where immaturity starts and stops, and also where all of those things intersect is important, especially in that beginning stage of addiction. Because what do they say? They say that when you start to abuse, and the definition of abuse of alcohol and drugs can vary depending on who you're asking to define it, but in my mind, a 15-year-old that's drinking 2 or 3 times a week to the point of either blackout or extreme intoxication qualifies as abuse, or drinking at all, right? But where does experimentation turn into drug abuse or alcohol abuse? But anyway, they say that you stop growing and maturing both emotionally, psychologically, perhaps not intellectually, but a lot of these processes are blunted with the onset of drug or alcohol abuse. And taking all those things into consideration, I think that once we get to a certain point, especially for me, when after I had some more life experience at about 23, 25, when, I understand like the prefrontal cortex is still not fully developed until around 25, 26 years old. And like, I get it. But I think it wasn't until around then that I even started to really kind of understand the impact of A, the alcohol and drugs it had on my life, B, that like the way that I'd grown up has impacted my life and informed my decisions, and C, how the ways in which I behaved and in which I hurt people because of these things impacted my life and the lives of those around me, and how that should be addressed. Now, I think that in society there's an actual problem about those of us who deviate pretty significantly from what could safely be termed as like, sowing one's youthful oats and getting more into the really harmful realms of behavior and misbehavior like I did, that every one of us who acts in this way, especially when we're young, that we are 100% of the time victims of some sort. And again, I definitely was. But I think that this culture or ideology around that doesn't allow for a lot of the nuance that I think is acceptable and also necessary. Because there has to be a level of accountability that we can no longer use. Because what happens, right? Like, we don't see the far-reaching implications of the seeds that are planted in kids like me at 15. If we wait too long to start talking about accountability, that even though people like me were victims, there's still a level of accountability to be had, and that victimhood legitimately, although legitimate, still cannot be used as a protection against these ill or misbehaviors or offenses against community and society. Because otherwise, we end up at 30, 35, 40 years old and are in a position now where we understand like the hazard of our behaviors, but we're so enveloped in this ideology, and we still have it, this victimhood doctrine delivered to us at every level of service. It doesn't leave us a lot of room if we're not bold enough as the individual in crisis to recognize an opportunity to step through and, kind of propel ourselves enough to get some escape velocity and kind of break through this atmospheric barrier of this prescription for life as a victim, right? That was something that was really difficult for me, but I think that in a lot of ways I was successful at doing that. But the point is, coming back to step 4, identifying these personal flaws, resentments, fears, and harms and patterns that have contributed to our struggles is essential. Because we can't, and we have to do it right. That's where the moral or the thorough moral inventory comes in and is heavily weighted. Because to misidentify too many of these things, or to not identify at all too many of these things, is to leave unevaluated or uncovered things that potentially and very well could and do often. They don't sneak up on us, but they at the most inopportune times will just chop you at the Achilles and just take the wind out of your sails and leave you questioning, because you actually did, as an alcoholic or addict, do this phenomenal work. You dug deep. You felt like you really dug deep, and you did. But you might have missed some shit. I might have missed some shit. There may have been different barriers. It could have been, the higher power stuff that we talked about, or the concept of a deity, or, for some of us, it's just really, really difficult to place ourselves in front of that mirror, that metaphorical mirror, when all of these things we're wearing it like a suit. And we start to wonder, have these things been visible are they visible to everyone? And have they been visible to everyone this entire time? What on earth am I going to do? But this self-awareness, we'll dive into that a little bit more. So I'm gonna bring up another point that occurred to me. Understanding responsibility and patterns. We talked a little bit about that already. The inventory process helps us understand the role that I've played in these problems, in my problems, whether it be in relationships, life circumstances, jobs, family, friends, whatever. There's an effort or an opportunity to step forward to take some responsibility for my actions without as much self-deprecating judgment as possible, which is really tough. And a lot of us get hung up on that part of it. right? Because we already have this really dangerous and hurtful internal dialogue where we're caustically like maligning ourselves and setting ourselves below and criticizing every little mistake that we make, like we're supposed to be these perfect beings when it's an incredibly big mistake. But to circle back to self-awareness, this sets the foundation for the personal growth and change requisite, not only to move forward with this step and in life, in our recovery, but also lays the groundwork for future steps. So going into that preparation for healing and amends, this inventory, and I'm telling you, it feels messy and cumbersome and clunky and ugly and smelly and stinky, but it's so important. And it doesn't have to be, in my opinion, mine certainly wasn't, doesn't have to be perfect and polished, but it's got to be thorough, and it has to be sturdy enough to be the foundation and groundwork for future steps, particularly 8 and 9, where we begin to like use this inventory to identify people that we've harmed. So now we've identified the actions and the behaviors and the thought patterns and processes, but now we're identifying the people, right? And we're going to them. This takes a lot of courage, man. It's really, really hard because so much of the time with stuff, even now, I have to admit, like I have instincts from time to time to just kind of like leave things alone, just kind of let them lie. But I'm telling y'all, that's dangerous, especially when it comes to the 4th step. But by confronting all of this stuff, confronting all of the pain and confronting all of the missed steps and opportunities for us to solidify relationships, instead giving these opportunities of relationships to flourish and grow, giving them away to our addiction, or what I rather affectionately term my solution. Cataloging all these personal shortcomings and the harm caused, we prepare ourselves for the process of healing and rebuilding relationships. Now, sometimes that's not an option, and not because we're afraid. It's because to approach it, and we'll cover this in steps to come, but I think it's appropriate to talk a bit about it here. But to approach it would be to uncover hurt so great, and we can't anticipate or dictate the level or rate of healing of the people that we've harmed in our addiction, right? So there's there's a real chance, and I've had this happen, there's a real chance that we approach this and these people and we get rejected. Our offer of amends is rejected. And sometimes it's like, you know what, cool, thank you, but we don't have anything else to talk about. That dog is dead, buried. I don't care to revisit it. Sometimes people, like, time has softened their hearts to these offenses, and they're more willing to dialogue with us and even heal and move forward. The relationships are likely not going to look the same as they did before. Sometimes they might. They may be even better. But also, like I say, there are also circumstances where these people, they're still in the trauma, and your name alone reignites the same feelings, no matter how far removed by time they may be. The events or that version of you compared to this one is too much. Too much. They have a physical, emotional, and psychological response to just hearing your name, and they don't want to go there. It's something that you got to accept. They may have passed away, and for whatever reason, you may not be able to contact them otherwise. So there's a concept called a living amends, where by living a spiritually principled and morally upright life, and I talk about this concept a lot on the podcast, by setting a personal standard by which we live our daily lives that is so incredibly high that it's going to be really tough for the things that used to trigger you and trip you, and get you off of your pivot, to do that as effectively as they had historically, right? Like, it's going to be a challenge because you're on your shit. You daily take this inventory. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean that every single day I go back into my life and I look at all of the things and ways in which I've harmed people. But what it means for me in my daily life today is that, hey, there's a real possibility. And the reality is that I still carry with me some of these negative thought patterns and behaviors. So I have to constantly check myself about opinions and feelings and things that come out my mouth, and, how I interact with people. And does this have to do more with me than it does this other person? And I'm telling you, and it's hard for me to say this, man. So I'll say this: our responses to the things that we see from the people around us, especially the negative responses, those negative responses have primarily more to do with us and the way we're choosing to process that data and stimulus than it does to do with the person, right? Like, I'm not saying that our response to negative behavior isn't justified, but I'm saying that this is our brain, and the world isn't as it is. The world is as we are. So what I mean by that is, if I look out into the world and I see nothing but negativity and bullshit, strife, malady, and grief, that's going to be my worldview. That's going to be my reality. But if I approach this life, and this is difficult because I do believe that there's a fine line between cynicism and realism. And on a daily basis, depending on sleep, nutrition, hydration, whatever, I may be way over into the cynical side, or I might be way over into the realism side. I do my best to be moderate as much as possible, but I'm human, so I don't ever get it 100% right all the time. But at any rate, if I choose to approach this life with a balanced perspective, and at least try to assume good intent. Now, that doesn't mean being naive. It means giving people the benefit of the doubt. Now, is that difficult, especially if you have a premonition or an intuition about something and they're true or close to being true more than they're not? That we shouldn't do that? No, I still think that it's a healthier approach. And again, this isn't me saying that we should approach life naively, right? We should always have our eyes open and constantly be clocking shit and like anticipating things, especially kids, man. You got to try and do your best to see around corners because they're not doing that. But what my point is, back to a more positive and optimistic worldview. We can realistically understand and objectively understand that bad shit happens in the world and that people do bad things. But if we believe, especially in services and in recovery, that even in our ugliest moments, because someone had to believe this about me, and I ultimately had to believe this about myself, that there's more good in most of us than bad. There's more good in me than bad. Then I think that's kind of where the process of hope starts, right? And you have more of an opportunity to have depth and meaning and purpose in life and in relationships. And we can take advantage make more of the opportunities that are set in front of us that we step forward into. than just coming at it with, just like this cynical view and, lying to ourselves when we know that our hearts are telling us that we're being cynics, but we're lying to ourselves and saying that we're realists and that, we're just not going to be fooled. You don't have to be fooled, but you will inevitably. But if you have a softer heart to the imperfections of humanity, you'll take it a little less personally, hopefully most of the time. Now, this doesn't mean that we're going to stand for anybody's bullshit. No, don't make that mistake, because that's not going to happen, right? You will be accountable for your mess. You can clean it up metaphorically and literally, and don't bring it around here. Don't bring that messy shit around here. Your problems is your problems. Our problems is our problems. They problems is they problems, period. That being true, two things can be true at the same time. There's also room for forgiveness and compassion and support. Now, the people who need these things, they have the right to declare and determine their personal needs, but they do not have the right to declare and determine from another person or entity or group of people the level of support that they think they're entitled to, especially given doing nominal amounts of work and equating that to a sort of amends itself, right? Like having 90 days, bro. Like you really, like in my opinion and experience, at 90 days, people still didn't take me serious. You still need to take yourself seriously so that this process moves forward. But you can't expect people that you've been hurting for years to take you seriously, especially if you continue to do messy shit, period. Like, it's going to take a long time. Like, I resented this when it was said to me once, and I don't necessarily know that it's true, but I agree with the sentiment. I had about 40 days. And this counselor at this treatment center said to me, we'll talk when you have some recovery. And I said, I do have recovery. I have 40 days. And they said, no. You've been clean for 40 days. Recovery doesn't start for a year. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's true across the board. She or they can't determine for me, given that I'm meeting criteria for like what I define as recovery, right? Like I'm working steps, I'm clean and sober, meaning 100%, right? Like I'm not dipping and dabbling. I don't have anything else on board. There's literally zero substances on board if you're not counting nicotine and caffeine. And I'm actively participating in change in my life, right? Like I'm seeking things out. I'm not just sitting and waiting for people to come to me and offer opportunities for growth and offer opportunities for processing and therapy and moving forward and whatever the case might be. I'm out there hitting it. Like this is my full-time job. I don't have a job, so saving my life every minute of every day, that's my job. That's how I approached my recovery. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been successful for as long as I have this time. Not being in jail, not being in prison, etc. And in closing, circling back to the point of it, you don't just do step 4 once. You can, people rework the steps multiple times over and over and over because I think as people and human beings, we're so dynamic that there's an opportunity to learn more about ourselves until the day we die because we're always constantly evolving, changing. Well, should be trying to do that anyway. But it's not just hit step 4, move to step 5, never talk about it again. This is a daily thing. We got to constantly check ourselves. I have to constantly check myself. Now, I do okay, I think, but I may not, always say to another person, hey, I was wrong about that. But I'll check myself and I'll do my best to try to not do that same thing again, right? Because I'm cognizant, I'm aware that if I let these things get out of control, if I let these behaviors and thought patterns start to influence my view of the world, then slowly but surely what's going to happen? That solution is going to start looking real enticing, right? Because I don't want to sit in this bullshit. I don't want to sit in this cloud of noise and emotion and negativity. I don't want to do that. So Coke Zero is out and 211 Steel Reserve would be in. Ew. Yeah, no shame in my game. I drank the hell out that stuff. But anyway, if you didn't do it on the way in, think about doing it on the way out. Hit that like, subscribe, and post notification bell so you can stay up to date on all the cool, fun, wacky shit we talk about here on the Bees Like That podcast. Peace, y'all.